Hi everybody, it's Sophia. So I had the discussion topic titled Language and Thought. So what I wanted to do was start by giving some of the book definitions. So thought, or also known as cognition, can be thought of as the act or process of obtaining knowledge, including perceiving, recognizing, reasoning, and judging. This is also on page 122, by the way. And then language is defined as a system of symbols that is used to communicate information and knowledge. So obviously they kind of have to go hand in hand, because in order to share the knowledge, you have to have a way to communicate it. So now that we know those, the first question was, can certain kinds of language be context dependent, as our book put it? So it looked at formal versus informal language, also known as good or bad speech. So I believe that they can be context dependent because, as the book stated, good speech is spoken in formal settings. So a few formal settings, some of which the book also gave examples of, were what include school, work, church, speaking with people of higher power, whether that's your boss or even an elder, for example. An example of this would be if your boss at work asks how you were doing, you might respond with, "I'm doing well, how are you?" Versus bad speech is spoken in informal settings, such as like with your family or your friends or people you're comfortable with and you know. An example of this would be if your friend asked you the same question, "How are you doing?" You may respond with, "Good, you." So it's kind of a shortened version, and obviously, as it says, kind of a less formal version. People also, I think, do this a lot of the time with texting. For example, if you're texting your boss, you likely wouldn't say LOL or BRB or some of the shortened versions that you would with your friends. So basically, this bad speech, also known as like using in the informal settings, you pretty much just take out a few words, shorten the sentence, kind of get short to the point. The second question was, could a person code switch between formal and informal speech based on context? I think that a person may code switch between formal and informal speech based on context, just because when you're in different situations, such as the examples provided before, I think they can even do it within the same conversation. For example, if you're talking to a friend in like an informal way, if your boss walked up, you automatically would switch to the formal or good speech. I think that this is when we learn language and the difference between informal or formal situations as we grow up as children. I think that it's kind of cemented in our brain when we should be using each of these contexts and the different language that you should use, and we kind of do it automatically without consciously thinking about it. So the next question was, could they also switch between languages? So kind of code switch between languages. The example that was given within the question was English at school versus Hindi at home. I think that a person can also switch between languages, especially bilingual children that are a first generation here, as in their parents were born in their native country. I think that they very often speak their native language at home, such as Hindi, and then English at school or even in their jobs. I actually have a Serbian friend from high school that does this, with speaking Serbian at home versus English at school. I also think that they can switch between languages even within conversation. I think this is often based on who's present, such as if it's me and her family, she would be speaking English and they would too, because I obviously do not speak Serbian. Or even based on what languages people speak and how fluently they speak them. For example, when she's talking on the phone to her mom, she may switch between English and Serbian based on if there's a bigger word that she doesn't know in Serbian, she'll say it in English and then continue speaking Serbian with her mother. The next question, what about dialect and accents? Might context cause a person to switch between these as well? I think that these are kind of separated, and that context definitely cause a person to switch dialects. A simple example would be like in northeastern Ohio, we say pop versus if you were more in like the southern states, they use soda. So you may, if you're conscious of this difference, you might ask for a soda there versus a pop up here. I think the accent's a little different because most people have the same accent throughout their entire lives. For example, I babysit for a family where the father's from England and he still has an English accent even after living here for 5 years. I think that in certain contexts they attempt to turn off their accents or even limit it to the best of their ability, but I think that they consciously do this. An example of this would definitely be within like a formal setting, an immigrant. They may attempt to limit their accent so they're taken more seriously or they aren't looked upon kind of in a racist view. I think that this definitely speaks to racism within accents. I think that they definitely go hand in hand. Another time that they might try to limit their accent, I think, which obviously consciously would be doing so, is so that another person can understand them. Some languages, other differing languages, cause people to have really strong, thick accents. One that I really can think of is German, and sometimes the thick accents is just harder for us to understand, just like ours might be harder for them to understand. So just to sum that up, I think that people switch dialects without even really thinking about it, especially if they're aware of them. But accents, I think that people consciously have to try to not have them. And then the last question was, would that affect a person's thinking in these contexts? Based on the book, I do not think it would affect the person's thinking, as researchers think that cognition or thinking is not based on the language that we speak. And then another researcher believes that we internalize language in order to organize our thoughts. So based off of these two findings, I think that one thinks in the context that they originally learned, which this can be influenced by your parents, the context that you really learned in, like, for example, if you were really in school or if you learned a lot of this language at home, and then also just your culture. But when speaking, uses languages that is based on context of the situation they are in. So you think from how you learned, so a lot of the times I think that that's informally, but then the context you're in, for example, if you're at school or you're at work, I think that you'll choose to use like formal language versus the informal, even though that's what you thought of it in. So the question I have for you guys is, since cognition and language are both cultural phenomenon and thought of as separately, do you think that one's level of intelligence is influenced by culture as well? I'm interested to see what you guys think, especially of that question, just because that kind of popped into my head. And then maybe based on what you guys say, I'll share my thoughts on it. Thanks.